You've probably met someone who isn't the most senior person in the room, but they feel like it. They seem like someone who's more of a leader, a higher level leadership role than they have. Maybe they don't even have a leadership role, but gosh, they sound like a leader. They're showing up like a leader. This is someone who you experience them as someone who their opinion carries weight. You're in meetings, their opinion seems to carry weight. People listen to them, with or without the title. People listen to them. They are the ones who tend to steady the room. They actually guide the room, even if it's not their meeting. And I'm not saying they're being presumptuous. I'm not saying they're taking over inappropriately when they shouldn't be. I'm saying that the way they show up is a demonstration to other people of leadership maturity. And it's that sense of seniority. Seniority, we all think that seniority is a rank. We think it's based on timing. We think it's based on titles. Seniority is not a rank. Seniority is a signal. And wanting to feel that way, wanting to feel senior, that is not arrogance. That is appropriate, healthy ambition to grow and to be your very best and to show up as your very best when you're in conversations, when you're in situations, when you're in meetings. And I'm talking about your professional life, but this goes for all aspects of your life. Showing up like a leader, being a leader in all aspects of your life. When you signal the kind of seniority that we're going to be talking about today, what you signal is you signal readiness. You signal readiness for growth, readiness for that next level. You are a relief to more senior leaders because they go, oh, here's my succession plan. Oh, here's somebody who I know I can rely on. Trust, competence, all sorts of things come to people's minds, perhaps subconsciously, but still. It's important that it has come to their mind in some way when you show up with leadership maturity. So competence alone does not create seniority. And it's a common misbelief. We think it's the title, we think it's the experience or the years. But tell me, have you ever met someone who's a senior person? Maybe they're a highly experienced person, but they still feel junior? Someone comes to mind immediately for me, someone I worked with in an organization over the past year. And it was amazing to me to really study this person and to see this person was experienced. New people were coming into their department and they were the ones to show them the ropes and do that on the job training and on the job coaching because they technically knew what they were doing. They had the years and they had a title that other people did not have. And yet this person did not demonstrate leadership maturity. This person still felt junior. This person was reactive. This person flew off the handle when things would happen, as opposed to showing up with more of a steadiness. Fast advancing leaders often feel senior early. And this person was not a fast advancing leader. They'd gotten to a leadership position and then they'd been in that leadership position for a while. There was not additional growth. And I observed it firsthand that this person was not showing up like a senior person. And their maturity, as the years went on in their career, they clearly had not kept up with the emotional piece that it takes to demonstrate leadership maturity. People are going to subconsciously assess your seniority, or do you feel like a senior person? And your emotional steadiness, that's absolutely one of the first things they're going to look at. Are you able to stay steady under pressure? Do you demonstrate perspective under pressure? Do you have perspective? Do you bring perspective to conversations, to rooms? What's the proportion What's the proportion of your response? The proportion of your response. Do you make that mountain out of the molehill? Something happens and it's a minor thing, but you make more out of it than it is because you're not steadying yourself. How do you frame problems? You know, you can frame a problem as a problem, for example, or as a challenge. And the word problem shuts down the room. The word problem has a negative connotation with it. Subconsciously, the word problem will literally, when you focus on that word, it will narrow people's focus into, oh, we've got a problem, we've got a problem. And therefore, it robs their brain, it narrows their brain's capability to think creatively, to think innovatively, to actually solve that problem. When you frame up a problem as a challenge, you unleash the power of your brain and the other people in the room, of everyone's brains, to be creative on how can we rise to this challenge. So how do you frame up problems as unresolvable issues and as a huge issue that's gonna just tank us? Or do you frame problems as a challenge that we're going to come together and talk through and walk through and understand it from the different angles and then look at our option, et cetera, et cetera? How do you frame up? How do you frame up things up? Seniority shows up in how someone speaks, in how they react, in how they make decisions, and in how they do or don't hold complexity. You know, the higher you go, the more senior you go, the more complexity you're going to have to deal with. And in terms of the longer you're doing and the higher your role is, the more elevated you are in terms of your role, it's just going to be more complex. It's going to get more ambiguous. Are you able to hold that? I was in a meeting once and I saw a relatively junior leader become the most listened to person in the meeting. And again, they were not the person leading the meeting, and they were not certainly the most senior person in the meeting. And they didn't even speak the most, but they were the ones that slowed the conversation down, not in an inappropriate way that annoyed people, but in a way that said, let's name what actually mattered. Let's talk about and let's focus on the key issue here. And everybody recalibrated around them. They recalibrated, and then they wound up recalibrating the whole room. It was an amazing moment, I noticed, of leadership maturity. And, you know, the cost of not being perceived this way. Most people don't. They're not perceived this way until they're given the title. And even then, they may not. And the cost to you, if you want to grow in your career, of not doing this kind of thing, the things that we're going to talk about in this episode, is you wind up continuing to be managed instead of trusted. You know what I mean by managed? They just, here's a task, do the task. Here's your next task, do the task. You're not trusted with the larger picture. You're not trusted. You're given these tasks instead of discretion to approach it the way you want to. Like, you're given tasks instead of goals. Here's a goal that needs to be achieved, and then you're given the room, you're given the length of rope to go and to approach it in the way that you see as best. And if you're showing up in certain ways, they're going to feel that they can trust you and they can do that more. And then there's those early conversations, those meetings before meetings. You get excluded from those earlier conversations, and you only hear about things when it's already been all decided, and then you are there to carry it out, to do the work, to do the task, as opposed to really being part of it. If you don't feel senior to people, I know this sounds vague, but if you don't feel senior to people, others won't treat you as senior. Seniority is an experience. It's not so much a credential, it's more an experience, and it's people's experience of you. Think about emotional regulation when it comes to leadership. Research shows that leaders and just people who regulate their emotions are perceived as more competent and trustworthy. And that feels like a crazy piece of research, because you always think that your competency comes from your skills and your trustworthiness comes from, do I have a track record of follow through? So it's amazing to think that forget about the past, forget about your skills, forget about your track record. In the moment, in a meeting, in a conversation, if you regulate your emotion, boom, the sense that people can trust you, the sense of that you know what you're talking about and you know what you're doing, that competency, that goes way up for people. And it's just their experience of you in the moment. Calm signals capability. And capability, certainly in this case, under pressure. And steadiness reads as strength. Steadiness reads as strength. We mentioned perspective. Perspective is a marker of authority. Studies show that people attribute authority to people who see those different angles. They see multiple angles. So they're able to think, in other words, more strategically and more creatively rather than just seeing things one way. They look at it from different angles. They balance short-term impact and long-term impact. So you show up in meetings and you say things like, well, let's look at this from a different angle, or there's an additional way that we could look at this. And you say, it looks like we're considering this from the short-term perspective. What about the long-term implications? What would be the long-term perspective on this? You bring that to conversations. These are strong signals of leadership maturity. And certainly, again, avoiding that overreaction. Perspective, bringing that kind of perspective to your own thinking, and then bringing that kind of perspective to the room, it's going to create credibility. And these go together. If you're not regulating yourself emotionally, and so inside you've got this tension happening and you've got this chaos happening, you're not going to be able to bring that perspective to them. But if you regulate yourself, you keep yourself calm, it frees up your mind in possibly a pressure situation to think more innovatively, to think more creatively, to think from that different perspective. And then there's the mountain out of the molehill. Research shows that leaders who respond in proportion to an issue, they're trusted with greater scope. So if you're someone who makes the mountains out of the molehills and you fly off the handle, you get into a chaotic kind of reaction to something that's not a huge thing, it's going to come back to bite you. Senior leaders don't make everything urgent. And they lead with this steadiness no matter what's happening. Now, if something is urgent, they'll make it clear that this is urgent, but they're not going to do it in a way of emotional dysregulation. So they know it's urgent, they know it's not, and they know when to turn up the heat. But they do it, again, with emotional regulation. So what can you do? What are some of the things? We've talked a little bit about some of the places we go south and some of the research behind this. Specifically, what could we do going forward? Well, my first recommendation is, and I'm going to give you 4, my first recommendation is that piece around perspective. What does senior presence sound like? It sounds like a line like, here's the bigger context. Here's what matters most. Here's what I'd watch for. Here's what I recommend that we watch for. Here's what we need to watch for. It's phrases like that. You hear that there's a period at the end of the sentence. There's certainly the last questions too, but they make a statement of, here's the bigger context. Let's look at this here. Here's what matters most here. So let's focus in on that. And they give direction. They give level-headed direction to the group because of their bringing perspective and leading with perspective. I was coaching a manager and she was in a management role, but she had not been promoted beyond that. She wanted to grow into a higher level of leadership. And we talked about it and we dug in and I found out the ways that she was showing up in her various meetings. And one of the things that I uncovered is that she was bringing data to meetings and nothing more. Now, data is a good thing. Data, we got to make our decisions based on data as much as possible. What she was doing is she was making the assumption that the data would speak for itself. And she sounded more like when she would come to meetings, she would bring the data. It's like dumping a bunch of data in the middle of the conference table or on someone's desk and letting them take it from there. And that's more of a junior approach. The senior approach is to bring the data and say, here's what this means for us. Here's what this would lead to if we don't address this. Here are the implications if we do address this. Here's the time frame on this. So here's what this means for us. In other words, she learned to start translating the information that she was bringing a way a more senior leader would. Again, senior leaders, Senior executives, they are just hoping that you're going to bring them something that's not going to take a lot of time. You're going to be crisp with the data and then crisp with your recommendation of what's next so that they don't have to do the sifting through the data, so that they don't have to do the translation. That kind of behavior gets noticed. That kind of behavior gets rewarded. When she started shifting her behavior, that perception of her, it changed fast. Now, perceptions can take a while to change if you've been doing something for a long time. If you've been doing it for a shorter time, people's perspective of you, how they see you, will probably change faster. And yet, I got to tell you, even if you've been taking one tack for a long time and then I'm going to start translating more in my meetings, and you show up with more of that leadership in terms of helping people to understand that perspective and bringing that to them, it's not going to take long. It's not going to take long. Just persist. Don't give up. Persist. It does not take long that the perspective on you will shift by you bringing more perspective. Second recommendation is regulate before you respond. Your seniority is going to show up in your pace. Are you somebody who's racing through? Because if you talk really fast, there's going to be two perceptions of you. Number one, maybe you're nervous. Number two, maybe you don't care about your audience being able to digest and take in what you're saying. I'm not saying I want you to speak incredibly slowly. I'm saying if your pace is race, 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 it doesn't sound as much like a leader. Leaders don't race. Leaders don't rush. Don't overly rush. They have some spin on the ball, but they're not racing through. So think about your pace. Think about your tone. Do you have a worried tone? Do you have a steady tone? And then your choice of words. Are you using words that if you don't regulate before you respond, you're going to use words like, I hope, I think, I'm not sure, but you're going to use that weak language that shows that you really aren't strong. You're not signaling steadiness. So you want to pause before you react. This is why they always told you count to 10, take a breath before you respond so that you can get yourself, take that breath and calm yourself so that you can name the reality. When you speak up, you talk about the reality, but you do it without urgency. That's just going to put everybody's brains in a state where we can't solve problems as well because we're all so worried about this and nervous about this and caught in a mental chaos. I remember early in my career, I was in this meeting and it was a stressful meeting. It was a high stakes meeting, high stakes situation. And one of the people spoke up and simply said, let's slow this down. We don't need to decide today. And it was like the lights, which had been dimming, the light came on, and it just felt like the light had been dimming, like, oh no, we've got this problem and we're going to lose out on this opportunity if we don't solve this problem, and the pressure's on. But when they said, we don't have to solve this today, it was this incredible mind shift of, oh, why are we getting caught into this vortex of thinking that is not productive thinking? We all need to take a break. We all need to take a moment. We all need to take that breath and go and get some perspective, take a step back, take a look at this, and then regroup, and we can make some better decisions. That person in that moment, the reason I remember it from earlier in my career is because it was just such a standout. It changed the course of that meeting. And it positioned that person as being senior instantly. It was our experience of that person in the moment, in that meeting. The third recommendation I have is to speak in proportion. Senior leaders edit themselves. They don't over-explain. They match their response to the impact. So you'd say something like, this matters, this is important, but it's not catastrophic. Just to remind everybody to bring it back to, all of this relates to some perspective and recalibrating the room. And the fourth thing I recommend is that you take ownership for direction and not tasks, and not wait for somebody else to give you that hand that ownership to you. You take that ownership. When you are in conversations or in meetings, and when you frame up the decision that needs to be made, or when you clarify the trade offs, it looks like we're considering this. Let's talk about what we get and what we lose if we go that direction. And let's do the same with this other option we're considering. If you clarify the trade offs, or you frame up the trade offs, or if you recommend a path, remember that person who brought all the data, that manager who brought the data but didn't recommend the path. You recommend the path based on the data, or based on your experience, or based on something. That's going to speak loudly. People are going to feel seniority even if you don't have seniority. Direction creates seniority faster than delivery. And that's what we think our job is. We think our job is all delivery, delivery, delivery. And it's true. We do have to deliver. We have to do our job. It's simply that if I just keep delivering and delivering and doing my job and doing my job, I never grow professionally. I never grow in my career. And I never take the opportunity to serve others and to serve your organization and to serve your customers at a higher level, and to take it further, to take that service further. So not just delivery, but go beyond delivery and provide direction, appropriate direction. Consider the environment, consider the situation, but be the person that proactively speaks up and provides that for people. And if you do this, if you cultivate this sense of senior presence and leadership maturity, you're going to start to see that people start deferring to you appropriately. They defer appropriately to you, and you're going to see yourself get pulled into those conversations. You're going to be pulled into the kind of conversations you want to be in early. You're not just going to be the last person to hear about a change that's happening. You're going to be pulled in early to be part of it. You're going to be trusted with, and here's a biggie, you're going to be trusted with ambiguity. And again, that's a signal that you are moving to a higher level in the organization. Maybe first in a higher level in people's estimation, but it's not far after that you get a higher level in terms of your actual role. We're talking about an overall identity shift here. You stop waiting to be promoted to act like a senior person, and you start getting promoted because you already do. You already do. Seniority, remember, it's not about your age. It's not about your tenure. It's not about the experience that you've had. It's not about your title. It's about how safe and how steady people feel around you. It's how they see you, and are you showing up as that person with that leadership, maturity, and presence? So think about yourself and think about where could you, and I'll ask you this and leave you with this, where could you bring more perspective? Where could you bring more steadiness? Where could you bring more direction? Where could you bring better proportion starting this week?